radical self-honesty, just not bullshitting, not other people, but myself. Right. I mean, just that has been the best thing is just stay in integrity, be in integrity. And as part of that, also be kind to ourselves when we fall off track, like you mentioned earlier, right? It's a long run, and I think we got to recognize that and be a little kinder to ourselves while also being really truthful with ourselves about what we're doing and not doing.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. B, triple board certified MD and performance and longevity expert. And on this podcast, we really talk about turning our traumas, our potential addictions, our potential suffering into the fuel that actually drives our greatest growth. And as you are listening to today's podcast, I really want you to look into your life. Are you in a place where you feel stuck? Are you in a place where you know that you are potentially sabotaging your growth and your next level somehow? Well, today we're going to start to unpack some of that. We're going to go through a person who actually has gone through addictions, be able to understand where those addictions come from. And in that process of the understanding of the healing from that is the gift that we are meant to give to the world. And I think after today's podcast, you will start to understand that whatever you might deem shameful, whatever you might feel guilty about, whatever you think is a fault or a flaw in you, I can tell you that it is a gift for you to be able to go through and put the work so that you could understand that everyone in life has a version of this. And as we go through that, we're going to have a gift to give to others. And so turn your pain, turn your passion into this gift that you are blessed to have. You're going to find out so more about how to transform that into the next best version of you on today's podcast. Now, before we get into the meat of the podcast, let me first invite everybody who is new into this podcast right now. If you are new to the Thrive State Podcast, welcome in. You've been attracted into this world because you probably have sensed an energy, a frequency coming from the thoughts and ideas of this podcast, and this has pulled you in. And if this is your first episode, thank you for coming in. I hope to bring you more value over time. And if you're returning to this podcast, thank you. We have certainly seen a growth in our numbers, and it's thanks to people like you. If you haven't already, please support the podcast by subscribing to the podcast, turning on the notification button so you don't miss a podcast, engaging it by leaving your comments, sharing this podcast episode with your friends and family members, and leaving us a 5-star review wherever podcasts are heard. This is really going to allow us to amplify this energy to the people all over the world. And as my free gift to you, I want to give you a toolkit, something that you could take with you, something you could work on to build in the habits to elevate the energy in your life and to start tearing down the habits that are bringing you down. All of that, as well as the important pillars to focus on to most affect your energetic state. Get that with my free Thrive State Toolkit by going to mythrivestate.com/toolkit. Now, on to our guest today. He's someone that's been able to transform pain, addiction into a new way of living, a new way of showing up. And it's because of his old traumas, being able to understand his traumas, that he's able to transform. So right now, I really want you to be able to recognize that whatever you might be going through, if you're suffering, if you're stuck, if you're in a place where you think that you are not the person or you don't have the gifts or skills, I can guarantee you that any flaw or setback or sabotage you think you are doing in your life right now, if you are aware of it, it's the gift to do that work to transform yourself, because from that point on, you're really given what you're meant to do out in the world. So our next guest is the co-founder and CEO of the Leaders Lab executive leadership recruiting firm and the host of the Leaders Lab podcast, a weekly show that delves into the world of leadership and personal development. And as Tony Robbins' teacher and president and founder of the Leaders Lab, he shares actionable advice and lessons from great leaders from all walks of life. Listeners can actually reach our guest each week as he unpacks the subject of leadership mindset, business scaling, personal assessments, health and fitness, and money mindset. With a diverse range of expert guests, including myself, Anthony Trucks, Tony Rosen, Nick Bradley, Chris Singleton, and Rob Dubay. The show offers unique perspectives and expertise on personal growth and development. He's an expert in leadership and team building with an extensive experience leading teams as large as 1,000, both in the public and private sectors. Look, you're going to learn so much about leadership, but what you're going to learn is really a human story of transformation. And I hope within it, you find some correlative nugget of gold that you would apply to your life to take you to the next level, to take you to your Thrive state. So ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy this conversation with myself and Kien Eslick. Kien Eslick, welcome to the Thrive State Podcast.
Hey, so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
It is such a pleasure to have you on. I was on your podcast, the Leaders Lab podcast. And if you guys are looking for a new podcast to listen to, that podcast is all about leadership, how you lead yourself, how you lead others, and so much mindset, habits, tools from the Titans on that one. So I really appreciate you having me on there.
Yeah, thank you. You're a great guest, and I love doing the show. I get to learn a lot as you do. I mean, I think I have a big umbrella, kind of like Thrive State, right, where you can say, well, anything that involves leadership, right, which can be self-leadership, fitness, whatever. So it's been awesome. Thank you, and thanks for doing the show.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to dive in. But before we do, there is a segment of the show called the 5 to Thrive. Game show style, the grand prize being a healthy meal on me the next time we meet in real life. 1,000 points each. So my question to you, Kien Eslick, are you ready to play the 5 to Thrive?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Here we go. Question number 1 is, what was your childhood dream?
Ooh, I know I got to be fast here. You know what? My childhood dream was fitting in. I know that sounds weird, but yeah, I think I just wanted to fit in.
Oh, wow. Kind of like Chameleon Man you would be.
We were just kind of poor, and I just wanted to be like, like my friends,
I can't wait to talk about that once we dive into the podcast. But this is what these 5 questions elicit is more juice for a conversation. 1,000 points there. Next question is, what book, quote, or phrase do you remember stumbling upon in life that just made you go, oh, wow, life is much bigger than it is? What was one of those pivotal books, phrases, or quotes?
There's a Tony Robbins phrase that says it's in your moments of decision that your destiny is shaped. And it was like, and that one's always stuck with me. He's got a few good ones, many good ones. That's
beautiful. 2,000 points. Question number 3 is, what is your favorite way of handling stress? If you were hit with a big sort of monumental news, big fire that's happening in the organization right now, what is the one thing that you enjoy doing to kind of ground yourself in that moment?
I guess there's I'm going to give you 2 answers. So one is, to me, there is peace in a plan. The way out of stress to me is a plan. But to get to the plan, sometimes you got to get your mind where it needs to be. And to get my mind where it needs to be, which is probably a better answer for the question, it's always something physical. So go for a run, work out, practice yoga, meditation, whatever it takes, whatever's right in that moment.
Yeah, beautiful. And we could actually maybe even talk about why the physiology of that works. Totally. And then certainly a mutual teacher, both of ours, Tony Robbins, does talk about how our physicality affects our physiology and our mental state as well. 3,000 points. That's for question number 4 is, what is one unusual talent that you have that people might not be able to guess when they first look at you?
I think in another life, I if it wasn't so isolated, I think I could really geek out on like programming and stuff like that. And I'm not actually a programmer, but I can really get into like systems and software and plugging stuff in, but I'm not fulfilled by that over time, if that makes sense. So I feel like I have to delegate it out, but I can get in the weeds. I can definitely get in the weeds with that stuff.
Oh, super neat. 4,000 points. The last question here for all the mobiles, the last 1,000 points. What is one bucket list item that you're committed to accomplishing in the next 6 months that the people in this community can hold you to account? that you could achieve either professionally, personally, or whatever that might be, what would that be? And
Next
as of now, this is when the
months.
podcast comes out, because when the podcast comes out, this might be a couple months from now, but I'm going to hold you because we are recording this podcast on June 4th, and we're going to hold you to account 6 months from June 4th. What would that be?
I'm going to make it a little lighter. It'll be on the bucket list, but I want to hit a bucket list country that I have not been to yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. And what might, 3 of those be?
I've been around Europe quite a bit, but not so much to Eastern Europe. I've only been as far as like Berlin. So anywhere over there would be great. I was going to just blurt out India because I've always wanted to do an extended trip to India, but that takes some planning. And I don't think that's going to happen in the next 6 months, to do that lengthy of a trip.
Wow. Okay. Well, beautiful. 5,000 points, which means the next time we meet in real life, a healthy meal on me, and a meal on me will make you live longer. So
it's going to be like
congratulations there,
or something like that.
Well, thank you for playing along, and I just want to dive straight into your story now. And
sure.
People already know from my introduction, you are, one of the most iconic leaders out there on the planet. You've trained with Tony Robbins. You are a trainer for Tony Robbins. I've done all of his programs myself, but like every hero, there is a hero's journey and a hero's story. And for myself, there was me chasing life to be this doctor that ended up getting disease. And it was my path of sort of remembering who I was and taking the steps necessary to change that. Just in our couple of minutes here, we've talked about, our lowest lows. Can you talk to us a little bit about maybe childhood and who you were growing up as a teenager that maybe led you to a point in your life where you needed to pivot? Because I do know, and some of the people already know, within your story is stories of addiction as well.
Sure. My parents, we grew up, I'd say very, blue collar, kind of lower middle class, struggling a bit. And there was some addiction in my family, my mom with prescription drugs, my dad with alcohol. There was some instability there. When I said I just wanted to fit in, it was like, I think at different times I was like, sure, I wanted to be a baseball player and I wanted to do this and that. But when it really came down to it, and I'm talking about early age, right? I'm talking about being 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. I just kind of wanted to fit in with the cool kids, when I was younger. And I think that was, I think I felt a little bit isolated, back then. And my parents, I think they did the best they could with what they had, but my mom was just dealing with a lot of mental issues. And again, that led to addiction, and that led to massive depression, and even like suicide attempts and things like that. And I ended up kind of finding my own way. There's always gifts and all this stuff. You've been through a lot of the same training I have been. And when I look back, and, there's that one exercise called Blame Effectively, if you remember that. Mm-hmm. Such a healthy exercise for anyone. And what that is, if you're going to go back and say, well, when I was a kid, I had to make my own money, or I had to do this, my parents weren't there. And it's like, okay, maybe all of that's true, but what else is true as a result, right? And it's like, ooh, oh yeah, because the story I used to tell was all about poor me, and when I'm talking about poor me, I'm kind of living in a place of helplessness. But when it's like, well, wait a minute, my parents going through their struggles caused me to be extremely independent at a very young age, start working at a very young age, and to start fostering an entrepreneurial instinct that was God-given at a very early age, right? Which then allowed me to be successful. So when I was a kid, again, I think part of this whole fitting in thing, I became a big partier. I was the guy that had parties, went to parties, bought booze, did some drugs. I walked into a recruiting, actually a Marine recruiting office to sign up for the Marines on a whim. I was like, I got to get out of here. I finally had some level responsibility, or like, hey, life is not going well. I need to do something kind of drastic. And I knew I needed to take action in that moment. Went in to see the Marine guy. He was at lunch. So I signed up for the Army. I didn't want to lose my nerve. and that was it. I went in the Army. It was a great experience for me. I was in there for just under 4 years and came out and started my own company with my wife and got married while I was in the Army and did this other stuff. And the rest was history. But one thing, you touched on, the addiction part. So that didn't escape me, even though I had examples or warnings all around me. I kind of went the same path. I think as early as anybody I knew, I started drinking maybe 12 years old. By the time I was in high school, I mean, I definitely wouldn't have said it at the time, but looking back on it, I mean, I had a habit for sure by high school. I mean, there was no weekend that went by that I didn't get wasted, and several weeknights probably. And then I got into my career. And if you think about the Army, it rewards that hard, play hard or work hard, play hard, right?
Yeah.
And I was the guy that could, drink 10 beers and then go run 10 miles the next morning, albeit probably not as fast as I would have without the beers, but I could do it. And so I was what you would call, a high functioning alcoholic for a very long time. That parlayed into a corporate career. There were warning signs everywhere. It's really funny when someone finally decides to change their life in that regard, where it's like, well, what was the one thing? And it's like, there were like 20 things. I mean, I wrecked a couple of cars. I lost over $1 million in stock leaving the corporate world. And none of those things made me quit. The thing that finally made me quit was I could fast forward and look at my life if I continue doing this and going, this is going nowhere, right? I'm not helping anybody. I'm not helping myself. I'm achieving certain things, but not feeling any level of fulfillment.
Yeah. Sounds like you went through a Dickens process potentially.
I did. I actually did. I mean, it's funny because you talk about the Tony Robbins stuff and, I'd say the last, 12 years, I've been pretty invested in personal development, but that came from me wanting to figure myself out. That came from me, same as it did you. How am I a doctor, but I'm sick? How do I call myself a leader, yet I can't even lead myself to happiness, even though I have all these things around me, right? What's missing? And so I got into those environments looking, I think, for what's missing, and then eventually as it starts to work, you start to want to help others,
Yeah. Would you say that it requires potentially a certain amount of pain for potentially people to wake up a path that doesn't serve them?
I think so. And I think so. And I think not that every coach or every leader needs to have been through their own, you don't have to be in a gutter to pick someone up out of the gutter. I'm not saying that, but I think there is something to it. I mean, when I look at the mentors in my life, they've all been through some stuff to kind of, get to where they are now. It's like they're speaking from experience. They're not talking down to you. It's a peer-to-peer kind of thing going, hey, I've been there and there might be a better path,
And what moment was that for you? I mean, I'm pretty sure you had a family at the time. What was the thing that allowed you to finally get some leverage? Because I think you were potentially aware of that you were certainly a high functioning alcoholic.
Yeah.
But and you were still able to get things done. So, maybe things didn't really have to change. What was that pivotal moment for you that said, this is leverage and I have to do this now?
Like I said, there could have been 20 going all the way back to when I was like, 16 years old or whatever. But the one that got me, and I think it's this combination. I was already in the Tony environment. I had already been through every seminar. I was actually signed up for Leadership Academy, and I was down in San Diego renting an Airbnb with a bunch of people that I had arranged, right? So there's some people I had met through training and 3 or 4 people in the house, whatever. And when you're drunk, like you make time, for yourself sort of, right? Which is just an excuse. So if you got to do a trip, you'll come in a half day or a day early so you can just go do your own thing without being hassled, right? Which is exactly what I did. So I got to San Diego early. I went to a VFW post, met some GIs. They were cool guys. We shot pool. We got drunk. That continued. We watched the McGregor-Mayweather fight, which I barely remembered. found my way back to my Airbnb, passed out. So there was nothing monumental about the day. There'd been a million days like that. But I passed out, and these people from this environment that did not know me like that were locked out of our house, were trying to figure out how to get in. Once they got in, they could not wake me up. And I just felt so out of integrity. I think what was happening too was at the same time, like I said, I had already entered that Tony world, and it's like, it's not like things just change on a dime, for at least not for me. I wish they did, but sometimes I just got to go through the pain. And one part of me was seeking and really pursuing in a noble way, like spiritual quests. So I was teaching yoga, taking yoga, helping people. I was doing a lot of things and not addressing this big elephant in the room. And the more I leaned into things that kind of served my soul, the more I was in conflict with drinking. So I would drink and nothing bad would happen or anything. And I'd be like, man, this doesn't feel good, right? I was always like, but I didn't know how to get rid of it, because literally since I was 12 years old, this was my medicine. This was my way, to cope, to communicate, to everything else. But in that moment, almost going back to that signing up for the military moment, I had another one where I was like, I can't effing do this anymore. This ends today, and I got to take action on it. So I called my wife, who was thrilled because she's got to, live with this stuff. I called another buddy of mine that was in AA. I told everybody in the house I owned what I did, because I gave myself an ultimatum, Dr. V, that I was not going to go into this leadership academy to learn how to train people in that environment being completely 100% out of integrity. Do you know what I mean? So I made a deal with myself, and it was either do this, either take action or go home. And if you go home, you can continue drinking, you can do all that shit, but you're not going to wear this disguise of, hey, I'm going to teach you how to live your best life while I'm not even attempting to live mine.
Yeah.
So that was the moment.
So many different things to unpack there, and I'll take them one at a time. I recently did a mental health summit, with Bruce Lipton,
I
Zach
saw that,
Williams, the son of Robin Williams, so many other thought leaders. And we did have a conversation about addiction and how maybe not so many people understand that potentially at the core of every addiction is some trauma, that potentially the addictive behavior is a way of coping with some sort of emotional pain. Has that been something you've ever looked back at, maybe understanding this context in terms of why the addiction at that point?
Yeah, I think when you said, what was the thing you wanted to be? And I don't know why that I wanted to fit it in thing came from me, but I wanted community. I wanted family. My family wasn't healthy. My family was dysfunctional. And as soon as good old booze came around, I was connected with older kids. I became more popular. It was fun, I'm not going to write off everything. I'm not really against booze. I'm just against, or I'm pro people doing things that are positive in their life. And if it's having a negative effect, I think any of us should take a look at our behaviors around that. But so it's really weird to be in your 50s and then go, oh, every time I've had a feeling of anger, I've just waited till 5 o'clock or maybe 4, depending on the day, right? Or whatever. And that's how I've handled it. I haven't really ever worked through proper emotions. So in a lot of ways, it felt almost like you're an adolescent again, because from the age of 12 on, I had stopped at least fully dealing with things, that were of an emotional nature, if that made sense. And so the trauma itself, I think, was just the family trauma, the dysfunction, there were several different incidents, but people drink for a reason, or use drugs or, obsessively shop or whatever. And we're just trying to get our needs met, and
absolutely.
And that's why I said that's where the conflict came in later, is I started finding really healthy ways of getting my needs met, right? It started working out more, started practicing yoga, started finding a way to contribute through personal development or teaching yoga or whatever it might be on one hand. On the other hand, I'd finish teaching a yoga class and then go, hey, let's go that was a great class. Let's go get wasted. Right. And those things were in conflict.
Yeah. Well, I love this conversation because there's two things I want to be able to have people take away from this. One is, how do you lead yourself? And
Right.
then two, as you are such an expert in this now, like, how do you lead others? How do you lead an organization? How do you lead your family? But it really starts with that, which you just said, is integrity. Because if you
Yeah.
don't have integrity with yourself and able to lead yourself, then it's really difficult to bring that beyond us. Now, you mentioned a few things in terms of that, in terms of leading yourself, that I wanted to just point out there as potential clues and hints, because we know so many people at the beginning of every year write down these goals of how better they want to be in life, whether it be earn a certain income or lose a certain amount of weight or gain, build more relationships, whatever the goals might be, but then they fall short. Number one, can you spotlight maybe why that is? And then I'll re-mention some of the things that you talked about before in terms of potential things that can keep people on track when it comes to leading themselves.
Hey, it's Dr. B. Going to take a quick break from the show to talk to you about one of my very favorite biohacks. It is the very compact Kien Move Plus Pro. I take it with me wherever I travel. I leave it at home as well because it's one of these things that uses patented laser red light therapy to go deep into the tissues to reduce inflammation and to reduce pain. I travel all the time, I work out, I've got these aches and pains that are everywhere. This device has been game-changing. There are also some studies suggesting using this can reduce systemic inflammation as well. To find out more about the device, you can go to their website, kien.io, or check out the website I did with their founder, Forrest Smith, on episode 181 of the Thrive State podcast. And as a loyal listener to the show, you actually get a very special discount by using the code ThriveStatePC. That's ThriveStatePC for podcasts. Trust me, this is one investment in your health and your wellness that you won't forget. So go ahead, get the Move Plus Pro today to take your performance, your health, and get rid of pain for good. Okay, now back to the show.
There was somebody that I had on my podcast theme, Kim Addis, who's a coach, and she said something that stuck with me, and it's coming up again, because I've always heard since the beginning of time that your why has to be big enough to pull you towards it, which I agree with. Mm-hmm. But she starts with, first you got to deal with your why not. And I'm like, that's such a good point, because I can have a really strong why for running a marathon, but if I'm 100 pounds overweight, I got to drag that weight with me, right, through the whole marathon. So maybe I got to address why I'm overweight to begin with, lose the weight, and then run a faster time if that's what I'm trying to do. So in my case, it was like, what's holding me back? We know, I think, inside of ourselves is the real us, the best version of us. And I knew I was so under living my potential, and I knew it every day. And yet, and here it is, this big giant elephant in the room, right? Anybody else could probably point at it, but you don't look at it. So you're like, well, what is it? Is it, I just need a different break. I just need this or that. I need something external to change, right? I need better luck. I need to invest in the right stock. But so for me, it all really started with, again, addressing the elephant in the room. I will tell you that making that decision was a brave thing and the right thing to do, but I didn't do it the right way, meaning I didn't seek out community. I didn't seek out mentors. I just stopped. And I had a really hard time with it because, again, you've got to unpack all these things that, why are we doing things, the way we do them? And what is this emotional baggage? And what are the things I've been avoiding? And until you address that, you're going to have problems.
I love the fact that you brought in the coaches and mentors, because they could at least do the one thing that I think you were doing when you finally said no, when you drew the line in the sand, was you called your friends and you called your wife and said, this is it. So that accountability piece is a big piece. Can you talk about just how important that is, and maybe how simple it could look like to get some accountability in your life for who you want to be?
Thanks for that question, because if I didn't do that, I'll tell you, playing off the last thing I just said, which was I was a little shaky in early recovery, right? I was questioning my decision. But I kept going, but God damn it, I put it out there, like I told I even wrote like a Jerry Maguire-ish manifesto that whole week while I was at Leadership Academy that I read to my adult children when I got back. You talk about burning the boats, they were burnt, they were burnt. Now, it would have been much easier had I, seeked more mentors after the fact, right? It would have been a smoother transition. But I can tell you that by that level of accountability, which I think a lot of times we're afraid to do because we're not ready to commit. If someone says to themselves, I really should, work out twice this week. And I'm talking softly and purpose because that's how we talk to ourselves, right? Oh, we just kind of nag ourselves a little bit. Like I should really be doing, instead of like declaring, right? Like this is what I'll do and say it to someone or multiple people that you respect. Here's what I'd like in return from you. I think good friends that are friends more than a mentor, mentee, or coach to, client relationship. One of the best things you can do as a friend is to have mutual accountability. And so I think just kind of owning what you want, stating what you're going to do, figuring out if there's something first. Again, what is your why not? Is there something holding me back first? Let's handle that. And now let's move forward. And here's what I'm going to do. And here's how you can hold me accountable.
Yeah. That is probably one of the most important things for me, is having that accountability. Now, I got to ask you this, because sometimes once you have made your declaration, many people will revert back to their previous self once they start hitting a few blips. You say you're going to go to the gym, then you miss a day at the gym, or, you end up, sipping on a little glass of wine or something like that. These little slip ups. One, have they happened to you since your declaration? And two, how would you advise people going through those periods of time where they do end up slipping up, and reminding them that it's not their slip up per se, but the action they continuously take forward? Because, getting to that next evolution of ourselves can be messy. And that's what I want people to know, is it can look messy.
Yeah, it's sort of like, it's a good question. Thank you for it. And I think I think we expect when we're on any kind of a journey, we have any kind of a goal in front of us, whatever it is, that the way to that goal is this just solid trajectory that goes straight up, right? That we're just winning every day. And if you look at, the most successful stocks of the last 5 years, look at NVIDIA, look at whoever, they have good days, they have bad days, right? They mostly do good things, though. They mostly move in the right direction. They mostly have a vision for where they're going, but it's not always pretty every day. If I take a 1 week look at NVIDIA stock, it's probably, at least judging by the news stories I've heard, not great probably the last week or two or month, but it's an awesome stock over the, duration. And so I think it's knowing in advance that, I remember, one time, like yourself, I lost a bunch of weight. I decided to get healthy in my 30s. And it started out for me not being able to run one continuous mile without feeling sick, and really hating that, because when I was younger, I was athletic. And I was like, I'm running a marathon by the end of the year. But the thought of running 26 miles when you can't run one is ridiculous. Like my brain would almost just shut off on the notion of it. It would just call bullshit on me. But what about if I could run one right now? What if I can do 1.5 by next week? What if I can do 2? Now, in between, there are these training runs that are garbage sometimes, or that I check out of, or that I walked part of it, or whatever, but I'm making progress, right? And so I think resilience in advance and knowing that the journey is not, I've learned a lot about resilience, I think, in the last few years, and it served me really well in relationships. It served me really, really well in business. But yeah, I would say I'm easy to forgive myself and to put myself back on track, because it's like, oh, you missed one workout this week, you hit 5. All right, let's get back in there, right?
Yeah. Since you brought up the word resilience, let's talk about that, in terms of building the muscle of resilience. And, people could define it differently. Certainly at a physiological level, it's our capacity to adapt to change or to handle stress. And there's a famous psychologist, Dr. Jim Lohr, that had a formula for resilience, which is resilience is really threat plus some time for recovery would always lead to growth and resilience. That part of resilience is handling a little bit of weight, a little bit of pressure, a little bit of change. You just talked about the context of relationships. So, one, can you talk about resilience in general? But I'm particularly interested in what you meant by that really showed up in relationship.
I think, I would define it more as like emotional resilience. I think if you're coming from a weakened mindset, which I was in the past, conflicted with this alcohol use, I'm conflicted with not doing what I said I'm going to do, so I'm out of integrity, so I'm weakened mentally, resilience is not going to be high, which means when you get challenged by people, when you get challenged by situations, it's bail. Right? It's fight or flight. So, I mean, it's just, I'm going to get out of there. I don't want to deal with this. Right? I mean, I think that was just one of my, screw this is like one of your favorite things. Hey, let's go get a beer. Screw this. I don't need this hassle. And so I would do that in relationships in the past. Whereas now it's like, no, let's just work through it. Take a breath. Let things simmer. Not everything needs to be. I think one of the most common things, I keep saying addicts, but it's really addictive thinking, which we all have. We're all prone to it in a way, right? And like addictive thinking is obsessing about other people and how you want them to be so that you can then feel content. Do you know what I mean? Like it's, and I think when you can kind of let that go and just go, hey, I'm going to handle myself the way I need to handle myself, kind of keep my side of the street clean. And that helps tremendously in relationship. And that's really what I meant by relationship resilience.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. And I just, share my personal story. The last 5 years of my own personal relationship has been super rocky. There are times where things would show up and it would just be two people with traumas that end up just hurting each other over and over again. But I think rather than run away, one of the beautiful things here is to notice that if you are feeling triggered by what somebody might be saying, doing in that moment, that trigger is really a point to be able to look in and going, why do I feel this way?
Right.
When I'm being spoken to this way or treated this way? What wound in me allows me to say that? Because the thing is, somebody could say whatever they want to you. If you're a healed person, potentially it will just bounce off of you. And that really allowed me to just look at myself. When you talk about really kind of keeping, your side of the street clean, but, it's a beautiful journey to be able to have somebody reflect back in you the things in you that you could potentially heal most. And that really allows us, particularly when you have a partner that's committed to growth with you, to be able to pause in those heated moments and just ask, why the triggers? Why is it there? And be able to allow ourselves to heal in that capacity. Yeah.
You phrased it really well. And when I'm feeling, I'll use the word trigger. When I'm feeling triggered, when I know that when something stays with me, so let's say you have a stupid argument or whatever, but then it's just resonating like, why'd she say that? Whatever. Yeah. Then and I'm getting better at identifying this shit. Unfortunately, it'll never go away because I'm human. But when it stays with me, it has a little to do with what happened and everything to do with how I reacted. Yeah. Whether I reacted outwardly or inwardly, it all had to do with me. Right. I get to control how I feel about the stimuli and the emotion of what's said and what's not said. And so that thing that makes an argument, you ever have something where you look back and you're like, what was that? Why was I so freaked out over that for like 3 days? That wasn't that big of a deal. It was because of my reaction. So it was more like the wound was maybe a little scratch, but maybe my overreaction, either internally or externally to the wound, made it massive, right? Made it trauma, and it didn't need to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, it definitely usually unearths, some sort of childhood trauma of not being seen, not being heard, not being good enough, not being accepted, not belonging. And as little kids, those things really hurt. And whatever our reaction is a very normal response for somebody that doesn't feel safe.
Totally.
And so that's why we perseverate with that. And so if anyone might be going through moments where they're like, gee, this is silly, my mind keeps going there, I would probably say to them, have a little grace to yourself and maybe,
Right.
seek out some help to really do that deep inner work, because that's something that is a very natural response, for a wound that potentially was never really looked at.
Yeah, and I think going back to what I was saying about feeling like an adolescent again after, kind of hanging up the alcohol, it was a lot of those moments, a lot of, oh, I just gotta deal with this. Like there's no way to numb out of it, and so learning how to process that stuff and learning like, okay, where did this come from? Why do I get triggered all the time when this situation happens, when intellectually it's not that big of a deal, but it feels terrible, right? And so I think if someone goes into a path of not using drugs or alcohol or whatever, that doesn't solve the problem. That actually just opens the gate so that you can do the work to figure out what's causing it in the first place.
Yeah, well, such a pivotal moment of the conversation, because it really does just highlight that these, core wounds that we potentially have in life can take us to areas where potentially we would numb those feelings, inadequacy, anger, all these boredom, all these things that we shut down with food, with alcohol, with porn, with potentially things that are very unhealthy in life. But it could also certainly bring up the parts of our life that when we heal, we could start to release some of those things so that we could actively start, making some very progressive changes. So I really want people to be able to rewind back the last 20 minutes of the conversation, because it was really I think, a great conversation to maybe talk about things that hold us back, and some of those things you talk about in terms of what we can do to start moving forward. But you also speak, to tons of organizations on leadership and leadership culture and bringing other people together. Now, whether or not somebody might be a leader of an organization, they probably find themselves leaders in their families or their communities. What is the leadership to you in that capacity? And how do we start to instill a culture when we're talking about other people with different personalities and things like that? That's often a question I get. And what would be somebody's approach? They might not actually even have the title of CEO or whatever it might be, but how do we start to instill more leadership, and how do we start to build a culture around, our organizations and community?
Yeah, certainly, like you're mentioning, it's not about titles, right? I mean, titles are a dime a dozen, and you don't need a title, and you don't need direct reports at all to be a leader. And we all have people that count on us and look up to us, and you have kids and you have friends and whatever. It really does start with that personal accountability piece, because the leaders that I've found that inspire me over time are consistent and radically transparent, right? Everybody talks about being transparent. I mean, radically transparent. I mean, if I'm saying it's a good idea to work out 5 times a week and I'm coaching someone to do that, have a look at my calendar. I'll update it. I'll let you know when I miss. And so we do really got to do the self work first, because to get to radical transparency would also hopefully means radical honesty, right? About it. And so we got to get to a point where we can do that. And so we handle our own baggage first. The other thing I think is extremely important is, and this is an ongoing process because everybody's different, but we all are hardwired to look at the world from our model of the world, our experiences, the things that have happened to us, the things that we experience that we then turned into facts, and we said the world is this way because whatever. And we all have those set of global beliefs. And what are someone else's global beliefs? So I think leaders can set this environment for radical transparency and ability to communicate and be honest, be vulnerable, but then at the same time do your best to really try to see things from someone else's model of the world. Jenny didn't get her report to me by 2:00 on Tuesday by my standards, by my model of the world, that means she's disrespecting me, she's lazy, like whatever else I think about it. Her model of the world might be she's got a kid that's sick at home. She just forgot about it. We never give her any credit anyway when she turns her stuff in early. The last 3 reports were never even read, so we probably wouldn't have missed it, right? I mean, there's all these things. And I think just asking that question of like, what else could this mean? What is their model of the world? How are they seeing it? And how can I relate to that? Because respect, I think there is no respect really without mutual respect, at least in one-on-one relationships, and you have to give it to get it, and you only get it by trying to understand where the other person's coming from.
That's really, really important, is being able to see and understand. That's what one of the things I think that some of the great leaders in sports and business are able to take on the understanding and perspective of where people are, because we can't lead in a vacuum. So what advice do you have for leaders? I know everybody has just gone through a pandemic. We certainly had strikes the last couple of years that affected, different parts of our economy. But what would you tell leaders who are struggling to motivate their team, where they have been hit with big change that's happening and their team isn't motivated? What might be the things you would have them focus on to be able to start re-engaging them?
I think sometimes it's tough if you're with a big company, because this idea of radical transparency can only go sometimes as far as the chain of command's going to let it go. And then you have to decide if you're in the right vehicle, right? If their values align with yours as a leader. But assuming they do, just complete honesty. I mean, let's say you're with a company that's let 30% of their staff go in the next year, but things are looking okay now. They're looking stable. I mean, I think you got to have talks about that. I know it's scary. Here's what happened. Here's how these decisions were made. Here's where we stand right now. I mean, I would do my best to kind of open up the books to them, open up to the degree that we can, open up what the plan is, open up that if there's changes, I will let you know. I mean, we've acquired companies before where the immediate thought, because people go to fear, right? If they're on the other side of an acquisition. So like, I'm just going to leave. We're getting acquired. I'm going to leave. It's like, well, you're going to start work with a new employer either way. You might as well go with the bird in hand, right? I mean, you might as well, maybe you're with a company that just got through doing riffs. Are you going to assume the worst, that it's going to keep happening? Or are you going to hear them out? But as leaders, if we don't communicate, pretty much everyone will fill in the blanks, and it won't be pretty when they fill in the blanks. So you can either help tell the real story, or if you're not talking, they're just assuming more layoffs are coming, more cost cuts are coming, whatever. So I think as honest as you can possibly be, and again, trying to understand their model of the world, and then building a future that's a little bit brighter than it looks right now. Look, guys, it's been tough. We're going to pull out of it. Economy's in a tough spot. As soon as interest rates come down, depending on their business, here's what's going to happen. We're going to look good. You're in good position. If anything, this has been weeded out. There's less sales reps, more territory for you, et cetera, et cetera. So there's always something, I think, positive that a leader can point to in the future while addressing what's going on today in real terms.
Yeah. What I really love as a part of that leadership is allowing your constituents to truly feel valued, to be seen, and to be heard. And I think from that place, you could start to build a connection and a little bit of trust. And certainly when you throw on vulnerability and radical honesty on top of that, is really a great starting point for conversation. Before I ask my last question, there are a lot of young professionals that are listening to the podcast, and maybe people about to take on leadership responsibility and potentially never had a leadership role in their life. What qualities would you say that they should focus on first as they're really kind of building the muscle of being this leader?
I think, I'll check these off quickly, but again, personal accountability. How are you going to conduct yourself? What is your schedule? What is your routine? And I think understanding that sometimes when someone goes from peer to leader and they're not sure, maybe they haven't had the best guidance or the best leaders, they sort of do there's a new sheriff in town, and that being a leader is bossing people around or whatever it is. And being a leader is really about building rapport, winning the hearts and minds, so that you can then have a partnership, really. I mean, it's not a subordinate kind of thing. I mean, to me, it's really, if everybody's doing their job, it's just a partnership. This is a hat I wear here. When we leave here, we're no different. We have families. We drive home. We do the things that we do. And so I think that's number one. I even created a document that I used to give to guys on my team that it was said what I would do if I was taking over a team today. And I'm going to use a team of sales reps because everybody can relate, even if they're not in sales. Sales is driven by data, right? How many calls, how many closes, how much money in invoice, how much in reoccurring dollars. And so when you take over a sales team, you have all these stats. And what the stats are supposed to tell you is who's good and who's bad, pretty much, right? Who's my President's Club person? Who's the one I got to kick out the door? But I would use the data very cautiously, right? I mean, it's there, but you're there for a reason. You're not there to read data and then make decisions based on data. You're there to maybe help use data over time, of course, to drive some decisions and some behaviors. But what if their leader was terrible? What if they were just unmotivated? What if they went through a bereavement? What if, so I always tell them to look at the data, but use it cautiously and never make decisions based on the data alone, right? Find out what motivates everybody on the team. Why are they there? What is their North Star? And try to find alignment between the individual's goals and hopes and aspirations and dreams and what you guys are trying to get done as an organization, because there's always a tie-in, especially when something is like in sales where it's commission-based. They can earn more money. They can do these things that they're trying to do personally. And I think those are some of my initial ones. And I think involving them, we didn't talk about this earlier, but with the team that got downsized is, bringing them in as part of that rebuilding process too, right? So not just hearing them, but allowing them to contribute in what will be their future and the future of the team.
So good. And what I sort of heard, in there, and this is sort of my approach to leadership, and I'm learning to do this because not everybody is so easy to do this with.
Sure.
But to love people.
Yeah.
To really love people.
Yeah.
Love your people.
You've got to care about them. Yeah. If you don't care about them, they're not going to care about you. And when you have that level of, I said mutual respect earlier, but let's take that up a notch and say love. If there's actually love, like this guy cares about me, I care about him or her, then you don't even got to ask them to run through the wall at the end of the month to hit the number. They don't want to let you down. They want to do it. They don't need to be told. And you should do the same for them too, right? They've got a kid's baseball game and need to cut out early. No problem. I'll cover for you. We got it, right? We got it together. So, and it's so much more fun to work like that, both as a leader and as an individual contributor.
Yeah. Now, before I ask my very last question, how do people find out more about you, your work, and where do they go for the Leaders Lab podcast?
Yeah, so you can find us on Apple, Spotify, all those places. What we actually do is leadership talent acquisition. That's my main company, right? So we place leaders in companies, typically in Fortune 500, but also in startups and stuff like that. So you can always email me, Kien@theleaderslab.co. You can find us online and Apple and Spotify.
Beautiful. Now, of everything that you've done thus far, and you've done lots of personal development, lots of work on yourself, and this answer could be as literal or figurative as you would like, but what has been your best medicine?
I know I've said it a lot now in this podcast, but radical self-honesty, just not bullshitting, not other people, but myself, right? I mean, just that has been the best thing is just stay in integrity, be in integrity. And as part of that, also be kind to ourselves when we fall off track, like you mentioned earlier, right? It's a long run, and I think we got to recognize that and be a little kinder to ourselves while also being really truthful with ourselves about what we're doing and not doing.
Wow, so good. My friend, it has been a pleasure
brother.
to host you. I appreciate your time and your wisdom and for sharing your gifts here with us on the Thrive State podcast.
Yeah, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Thrive State podcast. And if you're finding that this content is really helping you and your family members, please consider supporting our mission and our cause of elevating health, happiness, and human potential for people all over the world. You can do so by making sure that you subscribe to this podcast, sharing it with your friends and family members, and leaving us a 5-star review wherever podcasts are heard. All these things are going to really help elevate the show and to give us the resources to continue to bring more content just like this to yourself as well as the people that you love. If you haven't already, you might want to consider joining our community. We actually have a community where people get to engage with me in group sessions where we do breath work, meditation, where we do challenges together, really to be able to get us access to health, happiness, human potential, so that we could have longevity and performance in our life as well. You can check out our community at mythrivestate.com. That's mythrivestate.com. And if you haven't already, pick up a copy of my book, Thrive State. It really gives you all the tools, the pillars that you need to create a blueprint to control the energetics of your life. Who are you? How do you show up in the world? The choices that you consistently make create an energy in your body, and you can control this. And when you can control that, you also control the messages you give to your DNA that gives you access, again, to optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. And let me also just share a free gift to you. If you haven't already, please pick up my longevity and performance bundle where I share lecture notes, ebooks, breathwork exercises, and longevity and performance resources at thrivestatestarter.com. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. Thank you for helping us grow. Remember always, my friends, that you are your best medicine.